Our guest today is Ginny Fogg, one of my oldest and dearest friends in our profession. Worked for 33 years at Norfolk Southern, serving as the general counsel. She used to be the chair of the Society for Corporate Governance. She currently serves on the Transparency Scientific Committee, which helps to select the award winners every year for our annual Transparency Awards. And today, Ginny will talk about the art of disclosure today on realtransparentdisclosure.com. Jenny, as you probably know, you're one of my favorite people, so thank you much for doing this. You've always had your finger on the pulse of what's happening in practical terms. And so the first question for you is the one that I think in-house counsel grapple with the most, and that's materiality. Is this disclosure material, and how can we establish processes in-house to best make a determination? What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, well, accountants look to the lawyers look to the accountants. But bottom line is it's not a legal determination. It's not a purely numerical determination. Um, you need to look at it both from a quantitative and a qualitative aspect. So ultimately, we know it's a decision for the disclosure committee. The disclosure committee is going to need to make it. But if you're in-house from a practical standpoint, you need some sort of a preliminary determination. You need to start drafting the disclosure. So you've got to come up with a recommendation for the disclosure committee. So I think you really need a team approach on this. You need a good disclosure lawyer on the team, and you need the controller. You also need IR. You need to know what IR thinks about it, whether analysts are asking questions about it, because that is going to play into how it's received when you decide whether or not, if you decide to disclose it. And you also need the chief business person. That might change depending on the issue. But that team really needs to get together and have a good conversation and come up with a good, clear recommendation. One thing I always found helpful was if you have a lot of issues like this where materiality is really a constant reassessment, you can ask the disclosure committee to appoint an interim disclosure committee, a subcommittee consisting of those people. The business person could change depending on the topic. But then have them somewhat empowered to make that first decision. They would report it to the disclosure committee. You want to keep them involved. But it's helpful to know that you've got a process in place, whatever the process is, to get the right people together to make a joint determination on materiality.
And since you're on the Transparency Scientific Committee, I have to ask sort of a transparency question. How do you ask yourself, have we used plain English? How can we check if we're crafting disclosure that is understandable?
Well, when I first started training lawyers to write in plain English, I used to tell them, and this was true, that my grandmother was still a stock owner and she was 90 years old, to pretend they were writing to her. But they laughed. It didn't get much traction. So we finally came up with a system where we would get volunteers to read it. We're talking people that didn't draft the disclosure, that aren't corporate lawyers, paralegals, admins. You get 3 people to sit down and read it and give you feedback. They'll come back with questions, and their questions will tell you pretty quickly where whatever you were writing didn't make sense. So I think it's a really good practice to just ask people to read it and tell you what they think.
And then a question that I think in-house counsel, at least at the events I've been to and talking to other in-house folks, that maybe is not discussed as much is consistency. Because it's particularly if you're at a larger company, the public relations functions different from IR. You have the legal department, you have all sorts of different business people saying different things at conferences and events. And it's hard to tell a lawyer sitting in your office really keep track of all of the information that's being put out there and if everybody's on the same page. Um, so this is sort of a relationship issue in my opinion. What is your feeling?
It is a relationship issue because you need all those different parties working with the lawyer to make sure it's consistent. but at the same time, before you go live with stuff, you need a double check. And I think that comes back to the lawyer at the end. Um, I think it's helpful if there's certain hot topics you know they're gonna come up again and again and again, to go through and have maybe a good paralegal pull out what you've said in the 10K, the 10Q, the proxy statement, um, and as well as pull up what's on the IR webpage, all of sustainability report, everything, and put it on a one pager cheat sheet. Read it all together and just sit back and think, are these messages consistent? I know we're telling different stories for different reasons, but is the tone the same, or is the reader going to walk away with the intended message? So I think it's really helpful to do that. Once you get those hot topic sheets in place, then of course you've always got it handy if someone's heading to a conference and they want a short FD refresher. You can just hand them the sheets and say, here's what you've said about fuel in the past. So, these are clear talking points as long as they're still accurate. It's an easy reference. But some issues, like one example I have, after I can't talk to you without giving you an example from the transportation industry, having done it for so many years. But fuel, for example, was a really hot topic for us. In the transportation industry, it's an expense, right? There's cost and there's consumptions. So those are two different aspects of the expense. And then it could be a revenue as a fuel surcharge. And then it's an emission as well on your sustainability report. So you're telling three very different stories for different reasons. And you really have to look at it all from the same perspective, and make sure you're telling a consistent story across all three things, or at least stories that are not inconsistent.
And then I was reading the corporatecounsel.net blog this morning. Dave Lynn blogged about a study that indicates that companies that are having problems are now tending to be more positive because investors and analysts are using AI more, and the way the AI read positive disclosures gives them a boost. And they talked about, careful doing that, because that kind of disclosure can cause trouble for you down the road. So we're in a whole brave new world here with AI. But even before the AI world, when you're crafting disclosure, it's kind of hard without the benefit of hindsight, knowing that this disclosure we just crafted could cause problems for us down the road. How do you get that instinct going? Where is that just experience being a lawyer and experiencing the problems down the road, or what can someone younger do to get themselves ahead of the learning curve on that?
Yeah, you really got to take a step back, and think, what message are you conveying? Are you legally, as every word, correct, but you're saying it in terms that sound very, very positive? I just think you need to be really careful about it. Um, like you could draft something in black and white, you can draft something in purple. So you got to be careful with the purple. Are you conveying more optimism than the message actually should be conveyed with? If it's a positive message, fine, but it needs to be positive in across all of your numbers.
So I want to thank you for everything you've done for me over my career. And like I always say, keep calm and file Form 10K, or whether form your 20F, whatever forms your company might file.
All right. That's an awesome bracelet. I like it.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
All right.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye.